Maya Rodriguez wiped down the marble bar top for the third time in 10 minutes, her movements automatic after 6 years of working at Bellacourt. The upscale Italian restaurant buzzed with its usual Tuesday evening crowd, but tonight felt different somehow. Maybe it was the way the rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows, or maybe it was the persistent ache in her lower back from pulling double shifts all week. At 24, she sometimes felt twice her age. Her phone buzzed against her hip. Another text from the hospital about her mother's overdue payment. Maya's chest tightened as she glanced at the amount. $3,000. She'd been working 70-hour weeks for months, but it never seemed like enough. The cancer treatments were draining every penny she could scrape together, and the medical bills kept climbing higher than her tips could reach. Have you ever felt trapped between impossible choices, where every decision feels like it could shatter everything you're fighting to protect? That was Maya's reality every single day, watching her mother grow weaker while the bills grew stronger. She tucked the phone away and forced a smile as the hostess approached with a new party. The woman's heels clicked against the polished floors with the kind of confidence that came from never having to check a bank balance before buying groceries. Maya's dark eyes widened as she took in the group being seated at table 12. The man commanded attention without saying a word. He was tall, probably 6'2", with broad shoulders that filled out his charcoal suit perfectly. His dark hair was styled with casual precision, and when he turned his head, she caught a glimpse of striking green-gray eyes that seemed to assess everything around him with quiet calculation. Mid-30s, she guessed, with the kind of presence that made other people unconsciously step aside. The woman beside him was stunning in an ice-cold way. Platinum blonde hair swept into an elegant chignon, wearing a dress that probably cost more than Maya made in 3 months. Her red lips curved in a smile that never quite reached her pale blue eyes as she hung on the man's arm possessively. 2 other men completed the party, both wearing expensive suits but carrying themselves like shadows compared to their companion. Maya had worked at Bellacourt long enough to recognize wealth, but this felt different. There was an undercurrent of something dangerous about them, something that made her instincts prickle with awareness. She approached their table with practiced professionalism, her notepad ready. Up close, the main man was even more striking. His olive skin showed faint lines around his eyes that spoke of someone who'd seen more than a share of serious decisions. When he looked up at her, Maya felt an unexpected flutter in her stomach. "Good evening," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm Maya, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you with drinks?" His voice was deep, with just a hint of an accent that made her think of old-world elegance. Dante Romano. The name suited him perfectly. He ordered a glass of Barolo with the kind of casual knowledge that suggested he probably owned vineyards rather than just drinking their products. The blonde woman, who introduced herself as Victoria, requested champagne with the demanding tone of someone accustomed to immediate service. Maya noticed how Dante's jaw tightened slightly at his fiancée's attitude, though he said nothing. As Maya headed toward the bar, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. When she glanced back, Dante's eyes followed her movement with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. She told herself it was just her imagination, but the warmth that spread through her chest suggested otherwise. The evening progressed smoothly until Victoria excused herself to take a phone call. Maya was clearing glasses from a nearby table when she heard the conversation that would change everything. Victoria stood near the restroom entrance, her voice low but carrying just enough for Maya to catch the words. "Yes, he's here. Table 12, just like we planned." She paused, listening to whoever was on the other end. "No, he suspects nothing. The others will be in position by 9:30. Maya's blood turned cold. She'd grown up in neighborhoods where you learned to recognize danger, and every instinct she possessed was screaming warnings. Victoria's tone held the kind of calculated cruelness that meant someone was about to get hurt. Badly. When Victoria mentioned back exit and setup, Maya's hands began trembling so violently she nearly dropped the water glasses she was carrying. This wasn't just criminal activity. This was a planned attack on the man who'd been nothing but polite to her all evening. Maya's mind raced as Victoria ended the call and smoothed her dress with satisfaction. She looked like a woman anticipating a pleasant surprise, not someone who'd just coordinated what sounded like an ambush. The casual cruelty of it made Maya's stomach churn. She watched Victoria return to the table, sliding her hand possessively along Dante's shoulder while smiling at him with poisonous sweetness. The man had no idea his fiancée had just signed his death warrant. Maya couldn't prove what she'd overheard, couldn't even be certain she'd understood correctly, but the sixth certainty in her gut told her she had to act. Her hands shook as she grabbed her order pad and tore off a corner of paper. For a moment, she hesitated. Getting involved in whatever this was could destroy her life. She could lose her job, face retaliation, or worse. But looking at Dante's face, seeing the way he trusted the woman beside him completely, Maya knew she couldn't live with herself if she did nothing. Your fiancé set you up. Leave fast. Back exit now. The words looked stark and terrifying on the small piece of paper. Maya folded it quickly, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird. She'd never done anything this reckless in her life, but she'd also never encountered a situation where someone's life hung in the balance of her next decision. Approaching table 12 felt like walking through quicksand. Every step seemed to take forever, and she was hyper-aware of Victoria's pale eyes tracking her movement. Maya forced her expression to remain neutral as she refilled water glasses with hands that trembled only slightly. When she reached Dante, she placed the folded paper beneath his wine glass with movements so subtle they looked accidental. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, and she saw the exact moment he registered her terror. His green-gray gaze sharpened with sudden alertness. Maya turned away quickly, her pulse thundering so loudly she was certain everyone in the restaurant could hear it. She busied herself clearing nearby tables while stealing glances at Dante from her peripheral vision. He read the note with no visible change in expression, but Maya caught the subtle tensing of his shoulders and the way his hand moved slightly closer to his jacket. For a long moment, he remained perfectly still, and Maya wondered if he would dismiss her warning as the paranoid delusion of an overzealous waitress. Then Dante stood with fluid grace, his hand settling on Victoria's lower back. I need some air, he said smoothly. Walk with me. Victoria's smile faltered almost imperceptibly. Now, we haven't finished our wine. I insist, Dante replied, and though his tone remained pleasant, something in his voice brooked no argument. The two men at the table immediately stood as well, their movements synchronized in a way that spoke of long practice. Maya watched them head toward the back of the restaurant, her heart in her throat. Had she just saved his life, or had she completely misunderstood the situation and ruined her career over nothing? The uncertainty was agonizing. Her answer came exactly 7 minutes later. The front entrance of Bellecourt exploded inward as 4 men in dark clothing rushed inside. They moved with military precision, and Maya caught the glint of metal beneath their jackets before chaos erupted. Gunfire shattered the elegant atmosphere as screaming patrons dove under tables and scrambled for exits. Maya dropped behind the bar, her entire body shaking as bullets splintered wood and shattered crystal around her. The sophisticated restaurant became a war zone in seconds. The shooting lasted less than 2 minutes, but it felt like hours. When silence finally fell, broken only by sobbing and the distant sound of sirens, Maya forced herself to look over the bar. Victoria lay motionless near table 12, her elegant dress now stained with crimson. The 2 men who'd accompanied Dante were similarly still, their expensive suits no protection against the violence that had found them. Dante was nowhere to be seen. Maya's legs barely supported her as she stood on shaking limbs. The note had been real. The threat had been real. And somehow, impossibly, her warning had been enough to save the life of a man whose name she'd learned only hours before. Police sirens grew louder as emergency responders flooded the scene. Maya sank into a chair, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. She'd saved someone's life tonight, but she had this sinking feeling her own life had just become infinitely more complicated. She didn't notice the man in the expensive suit watching her from across the street, or the way he spoke quietly into his phone while keeping his eyes fixed on her face. Maya Rodriguez had stepped into a world where simple kindness could be the most dangerous thing of all. The police station's fluorescent lights made everything look harsh and unforgiving at 3 in the morning. Maya sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair, nursing her 4th cup of terrible coffee while Detective Morrison asked the same questions for the 3rd time. Her hands still shook slightly whenever she thought about the sound of gunfire echoing through Bellecourt's dining room. "You're certain you didn't know any of the victims personally?" Detective Morrison pressed, his weathered face skeptical. "No previous contact with Dante Romano or his associates." Maya shook her head, fatigue weighing down her responses. "I told you, I'd never seen any of them before tonight. They were just customers." She couldn't bring herself to mention the note. Something deep in her gut warned that revealing her role in Dante's escape would only complicate an already terrifying situation. "And you saw nothing unusual before the shooting began?" The lie came easier the third time. "Nothing at all. I was clearing tables when the men burst in." The memory of Victoria's phone conversation burned in her throat, but Maya forced herself to maintain eye contact with the detective. After 2 more hours of repetitive questioning, Maya was finally released. The cab ride back to her studio apartment in Queens felt surreal. Less than 12 hours ago, her biggest worry had been paying her mother's medical bills. Now she was a witness in what the news was calling a gangland execution. Maya's apartment building had seen better decades. The elevator rarely worked, and tonight was no exception. She climbed 4 flights of stairs on legs that felt like rubber, every shadow in the stairwell making her pulse spike with anxiety. The shooting had stripped away her sense of safety, leaving her hyper-aware of every sound and movement. Her apartment door stood slightly ajar. Maya froze on the landing, her blood turning to ice. She always locked her door. Always. In this neighborhood, you learned that carelessness could cost you everything you owned. She approached slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs as she pushed the door open with trembling fingers. Someone had ransacked her small space with methodical thoroughness. Her few belongings lay scattered across the floor, furniture overturned, even her mattress slashed open with what looked like knife cuts. But it was the message spray painted across her wall in red letters that made her knees buckle. "We know what you did." Maya stumbled backward into the hallway, bile rising in her throat. The men who'd killed Victoria and the others knew about her warning to Dante. Somehow, they'd identified her and found where she lived. The reality of her situation crashed down on her like a physical blow. She wasn't just a witness anymore. She was a target. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Don't go to police. Don't go home again. Someone wants to meet you. Bellecourt parking lot, 1 hour." Maya's hands shook so violently she could barely hold the phone. This was how people disappeared in her old neighborhood. They got messages like this, and then their families never heard from them again. But what choice did she have? Whoever had broken into her apartment clearly knew her every movement. She spent the hour walking the streets near the restaurant, too terrified to sit still, too scared to run. When she finally forced herself to return to Bellecourt's parking lot, she expected to find the men who'd painted threats on her wall. Instead, Dante Romano stepped out of the shadows near the dumpsters. Even in the dim streetlight, he looked completely different from the elegant dinner guest she'd served hours earlier. Gone was the expensive suit, replaced by dark jeans and a leather jacket that did nothing to diminish his commanding presence. If anything, he looked more dangerous now, more like someone who belonged in the world that had just exploded into her life. "You saved my life tonight," he said without preamble, his voice carrying that same hint of accent she'd noticed at dinner. "Why?" Maya wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how exposed she felt in the empty parking lot. "I heard your fiancée on the phone. She was setting you up. I couldn't just let someone get killed when I could prevent it." Dante studied her face with those intense green-gray eyes, and Maya had the unsettling feeling he could read thoughts she didn't even know she was thinking. Most people would have minded their own business. "Most people don't have to live with themselves afterward," Maya replied, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. Something shifted in Dante's expression, a softening around his eyes that made him look younger and infinitely more human. "You realize you're in danger now. Victoria wasn't working alone. Her family knows you witnessed the setup, and they know you warned me." Maya's stomach clenched with fresh fear. "I figured that out when I found my apartment destroyed." She tried to keep the tremor out of her voice. "They left a message. They know what I did." Dante's jaw tightened with what looked like anger, though Maya sensed it wasn't directed at her. "Show me," he commanded, and the authority in his voice made it clear he expected immediate compliance. 20 minutes later, Maya watched Dante examine her ransacked apartment with the methodical focus of someone experienced in assessing threats. His presence filled her small space completely, making the studio feel even more cramped than usual. When he saw the spray-painted message, his expression went completely cold. "Pack whatever you need," he said, turning to face her. "You can't stay here." Maya's defensive instincts flared despite her terror. "I can't just leave my life behind because some criminals are angry with me. I have a job, responsibilities. My mother needs me." "Your mother needs you alive," Dante replied bluntly. "These people don't leave witnesses, Maya. They eliminate problems. Right now, you're a problem." The casual way he spoke about violence made Maya step backward involuntarily. "And you're what, exactly? You're part of this world, aren't you? This whole thing, the shooting, it's all connected to whatever business you're really in." Dante didn't deny it, which somehow made Maya respect him more than a lie would have. "Yes, I'm part of this world. But right now, I'm the only thing standing between you and people who see killing as a simple business decision." Maya wanted to argue, to insist she could handle this on her own, but the memory of her destroyed apartment made the words stick in her throat. She'd been naive to think saving someone's life would be consequence-free. The real world didn't work like the movies, where heroes rode off into the sunset and everyone else went back to normal. "I won't be anyone's prisoner," she said finally, lifting her chin with more courage than she felt. "If I come with you, it's because I choose to, not because you're forcing me." Something that might have been approval flickered in Dante's eyes. "Fair enough. But understand this, Maya Rodriguez. The people hunting you won't hesitate to hurt innocent bystanders to get to you. Your coworkers, your neighbors, your mother. Staying in your old life doesn't just put you at risk. It puts everyone around you in danger." The thought of her mother becoming a target because of her actions made Maya's decision for her. She'd spent years protecting the only family she had left. She couldn't stop now, even if protection meant trusting a man whose world had already brought violence crashing into her life. "Fine," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I need to know what I'm getting into. I need to understand what kind of danger I'm really in." Dante nodded once, sharp and decisive. "Pack light. We leave in 10 minutes. I'll explain everything once you're somewhere safe." As Maya threw clothes into a duffel bag with shaking hands, she wondered if she was making the biggest mistake of her life. But when she looked at the threats painted across her wall, she realized she might already be living it. At least with Dante Romano, she had a chance at survival. When they reached the parking lot, Maya saw the black SUV waiting with its engine running and tinted windows that revealed nothing of whoever sat inside. This was it. The moment where her normal life officially ended and something entirely unknown began. Dante opened the passenger door for her, his hand briefly touching her lower back to guide her inside. Even through her fear, Maya noticed the gentleness of the gesture, so at odds with the danger radiating from everything else about this situation. As they drove away from her old neighborhood, Maya caught a glimpse of men watching from across the street. Even in the darkness, she could see enough to know they hadn't been there when she'd arrived. Dante had been right. The people hunting her were already closing in. Her choice to trust him might be the only reason she was still breathing. "Where are we going?" Maya asked as the city lights blurred past her window. "Somewhere they can't reach you," Dante replied, his hands steady on the steering wheel. "And somewhere I can figure out how to keep you alive long enough to end this permanently." The finality in his voice should have terrified her. Instead, Maya found herself believing that if anyone could protect her from the nightmare her life had become, it was the dangerous man sitting beside her. Maya had never been in a space that cost more than her entire life's earnings. Dante's penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of a gleaming Manhattan high-rise, and stepping into it felt like entering a different universe entirely. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city sprawling below, while modern furniture in rich dark woods and soft leathers created an atmosphere of understated luxury that screamed serious money. The kitchen alone was larger than her destroyed studio apartment. Professional-grade appliances gleamed under pendant lighting, and the marble island could have seated 8 people comfortably. Maya ran her fingers along the cool stone surface, trying to reconcile this level of wealth with the man who'd rescued her from a parking lot just hours earlier. "This is temporary," she said, more to herself than to Dante, who was speaking quietly into his phone near the windows. Just until whatever this is gets resolved. She needed to maintain the illusion that her normal life still existed somewhere, waiting for her to return to it. Dante ended his call and approached her with that fluid grace she was beginning to recognize as distinctly his. His presence filled the vast space effortlessly, making even the enormous penthouse feel more intimate. "You'll stay in the guest suite upstairs," he said. "It has its own bathroom and sitting area. You should be comfortable there." Maya wanted to argue about the arrangement, to insist she could find her own safe place to stay, but the memory of her ransacked apartment kept the words locked in her throat. Besides, where else could she go that wouldn't put innocent people at risk? Her options had been stripped away the moment she'd decided to save a stranger's life. "I need to call my mother," Maya said, suddenly remembering that she'd missed her daily check-in. "She'll be worried if she doesn't hear from me." Dante's expression grew serious. "Use the landline. Your cell phone can be tracked." "And Maya?" He paused, his green-gray eyes holding her gaze with uncomfortable intensity. "Don't tell her where you are or who you're with. The less she knows, the safer she'll be." The reminder of her mother's potential danger made Maya's chest tighten with anxiety. Everything about this situation felt surreal, like she'd stepped into someone else's life by accident and couldn't find her way back to her own. After a brief, carefully edited conversation with her mother that left Maya feeling guilty for the lies of omission, she found herself standing alone in a guest suite that was more luxurious than any hotel she'd ever imagined staying in. The bed was massive, covered in linens that probably cost more than her monthly rent. A sitting area with plush chairs faced another wall of windows showing the glittering cityscape. Maya sank into one of the chairs and finally allowed herself to process the full scope of what had happened. 24 hours ago, her biggest worry had been stretching her tips to cover groceries for the week. Now she was hiding in a criminal's penthouse because she'd witnessed his fiancée's betrayal and somehow become a target for assassination. The absurdity of it should have felt like a nightmare she'd eventually wake up from. Instead, Maya found herself thinking about the way Dante had looked at her in the restaurant, the careful gentleness in his voice when he'd guided her into his car, the protective anger that had tightened his jaw when he'd seen the threats painted on her wall. She was attracted to him, despite everything logical screaming that she should be terrified of him and everything he represented. Maya couldn't ignore the flutter in her stomach when his attention focused on her, or the way her pulse quickened when he moved with that predatory grace. Maya pressed her palms against her eyes and tried to make sense of her reactions. She'd always been practical, careful, someone who planned every decision and avoided unnecessary risks. Dante Romano was the antithesis of everything safe and sensible. So why did she feel more secure in his dangerous world than she had in her own predictable life? A soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Dante's voice carried through the door, asking if she was hungry. Maya realized she hadn't eaten since before her shift at Bellecourt, and the mention of food made her stomach clench with sudden hunger. She found Dante in his spectacular kitchen, sleeves of his dark shirt rolled up to reveal strong forearms as he worked at the stove. The domestic scene was so at odds with everything she knew about him that Maya paused in the doorway, struck by the contradiction. "You cook," she said, unable to hide her surprise. Dante glanced up with what might have been amusement flickering in his eyes. "My mother insisted all her children learn to take care of themselves. She said depending on others for basic needs was a weakness we couldn't afford." The mention of his family sparked Maya's curiosity about the man who'd upended her life so completely. She moved closer to the stove, drawn by the incredible smells emanating from whatever he was preparing. The proximity put her close enough to catch his scent, something clean and masculine with hints of expensive cologne that made her hyper-aware of his physical presence. "What are you making?" Maya asked, trying to keep her voice casual despite the way her heart rate had increased. "Risotto with pancetta and peas. Nothing complicated, but it's comfort food." Dante's hands moved with practiced efficiency as he stirred the rice, and Maya found herself watching the fluid motion with fascination. He cooked like he did everything else, with complete confidence and control. "You don't have to take care of me," Maya said quietly. "I mean, I appreciate the protection, but you don't need to feed me like I'm some helpless refugee." Dante's stirring paused for just a moment. "In my family, we take care of people under our protection." It's not charity, Maya. It's honor. The serious way he said it made Maya study his profile as he returned his attention to the risotto. There was something about the word honor that seemed to carry particular weight for him, like it was a core principle rather than just a concept. What kind of family business are you in exactly? Maya asked, though part of her wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Dante was quiet for so long that Maya thought he might not respond. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that suggested years of complicated decisions and their consequences. My family has interests in import, export, construction, and various service industries, he said carefully. We've been in business for 3 generations, building something that provides for a lot of people and their families. The diplomatic phrasing told Maya everything and nothing simultaneously. She'd grown up in neighborhoods where you learned to recognize the careful language people used when their work couldn't be discussed openly. But she'd also learned to distinguish between people who hurt others for profit and those who operated by codes that included protection and loyalty. And Victoria, Maya prompted, needing to understand the betrayal that had started this entire nightmare. Something dark flickered across Dante's features. Victoria came from a family with competing interests. What I thought was love was actually a long-term strategy to gain access to information about my family's operations. The pain beneath his controlled words was unmistakable. Maya felt an unexpected surge of sympathy for him. Being betrayed by someone you loved was a special kind of devastating, especially when that betrayal had nearly cost him his life. I'm sorry, Maya said softly. That must have been horrible to discover. Dante looked at her then, really looked at her, and Maya felt something shift in the air between them. The careful distance he'd been maintaining seemed to crack slightly, revealing glimpses of the man behind the protective facade. You saved my life, and I don't even know why you did it, he said. Most people would have pretended they hadn't heard anything. Self-preservation is usually stronger than conscience. Maya considered his words while watching him plate the risotto with the same careful attention to detail he seemed to bring to everything. I couldn't live with myself if I'd let someone get hurt when I could prevent it. That's not the kind of person I want to be, even when helping puts you in danger. Especially then, Maya replied, surprised by her own certainty. What's the point of being safe if you have to compromise who you are to stay that way? Dante's hands stilled on the plates, and when he looked at her this time, Maya saw something that looked like recognition in his green-gray eyes. As if he'd found something in her response that resonated with his own code of ethics. The risotto was incredible, creamy and rich with flavors that made Maya close her eyes in appreciation. They ate mostly in comfortable silence, the city lights twinkling beyond the windows creating an intimate atmosphere despite the vast space around them. This is amazing, Maya said, taking another bite. Where did you learn to cook like this? My mother, Dante replied, and his voice carried warmth when he mentioned her. Sofia Romano is barely 5 feet tall, but she ruled our kitchen with absolute authority. She said food was love made tangible, and love required skill and attention to be done properly. Maya smiled at the image of this dangerous man learning life lessons from his tiny mother. It humanized him in a way that made her chest flutter with something more complex than simple attraction. Do you miss it? She asked. Cooking for family, I mean. This lifestyle must make normal relationships complicated. More complicated than I realized, Dante admitted. Victoria was supposed to understand that world, but she saw it as something to exploit rather than respect. Maya set down her fork, struck by the loneliness in his voice. For someone who commanded such obvious power and respect, Dante seemed profoundly isolated. She wondered what it cost him to maintain the strength everyone else relied on. Without thinking, Maya reached across the small table they were sharing and touched his hand briefly. The contact sent electricity shooting up her arm, and she started to pull away, but Dante's fingers moved slightly to brush against hers. The touch was gentle, questioning rather than demanding, and Maya felt her breath catch at the unexpected tenderness of it. For a moment, they remained connected by nothing more than the whisper of skin against skin, but the intimacy of it felt more profound than any kiss Maya had ever experienced. Then Dante's phone rang, shattering the moment with harsh reality. He answered with a sharp greeting, and Maya watched his entire demeanor shift back into the controlled authority she was beginning to recognize as his business mode. The conversation was brief and conducted in rapid Italian, but Maya caught enough words to understand it wasn't good news. When Dante ended the call, his expression was grim. "What is it?" Maya asked, though her stomach was already sinking with dread. "They know you're with me," Dante said. "Victoria's family is spreading word that you're under my protection, trying to flush you out by making it seem like I can't keep you safe." Maya felt the brief moment of peace evaporate as reality crashed back down around them. She wasn't safe, even here in Dante's fortress-like penthouse. The people hunting her were still out there, still planning, still dangerous. But as she looked at Dante's determined expression, Maya realized something had changed during their quiet dinner together. She was no longer just a problem he needed to solve or a witness he needed to protect. Somehow, in the space of a shared meal and a gentle touch, she'd become something worth protecting for her own sake. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, Maya found herself hoping she'd become something worth the risk. Maya woke on her third morning in Dante's penthouse with a restlessness that had nothing to do with the luxurious guest suite or the stunning city views. She'd spent 2 days essentially hidden away while Dante handled what he diplomatically called business, and the enforced inactivity was driving her quietly insane. She wasn't built for sitting still while other people managed her problems. Over breakfast, she confronted him about it. "I need to work," she said, stirring her coffee with more force than necessary. "I can't just hide here indefinitely while my life falls apart. My mother's medical bills aren't going to pay themselves, and I refuse to be anyone's kept woman." Dante looked up from his tablet where he'd been reading what appeared to be financial reports. His dark hair was slightly mussed from sleep, and Maya tried not to notice how the casual look made him even more attractive. "It's not safe for you to return to Bellecourt or anywhere else you're known." "Then find me somewhere new to work," Maya replied. Meeting his green-gray eyes with determination, she felt more strongly than her fear. "I'm not going to hide behind your protection forever, Dante. I need to maintain some independence, or I'll lose myself completely in this situation." Something shifted in Dante's expression, what looked like respect mixing with concern. After a moment, he nodded slowly. "My family owns a restaurant in Little Italy, Nana's Kitchen. It's smaller than Bellecourt, but serves genuine Italian cuisine. The staff there are all connected to people under our protection. You'd be safe there." Maya felt a flutter of relief at the prospect of returning to work, even if it meant accepting employment from Dante's organization. At least she'd be earning her own money again instead of feeling like a beautiful prisoner in his gilded cage. 2 hours later, Maya found herself standing in the cramped but warm kitchen of Nana's Kitchen, meeting Sofia Romano for the first time. Dante's mother was exactly as he described her, barely reaching Maya's shoulder, but radiating the kind of authority that made grown men straighten their posture instinctively. Sophia's sharp, dark eyes assessed Maya with the thoroughness of someone experienced in reading people quickly and accurately. "You're the girl who saved my son's life," she said without preamble, her accent thicker than Dante's, but her English perfectly clear. "I just did what anyone should have done," Maya replied, suddenly nervous about making a good impression on this formidable woman. Sophia's expression softened slightly. "Most people would have minded their own business. The fact that you risked yourself for a stranger tells me everything I need to know about your character." She paused, studying Maya's face with maternal intensity. "Dante says you need work. Can you handle a real kitchen, or are you just good with fancy plating?" Maya smiled despite her nervousness. "I've been working in restaurants since I was 16. I can handle whatever you throw at me." "Good," Sophia replied with satisfaction. "We'll see how you do during lunch rush. If you can survive my kitchen during the busy hours, you might actually be worthy of my son's attention." The casual mention of Dante's attention made Maya's cheeks warm, but Sophia was already turning away to bark instructions at the prep cooks in rapid Italian that left no doubt about who ruled this domain. Working at Nana's Kitchen was like stepping into a different world. The restaurant was smaller and less polished than Bellecourt, but the food was extraordinary and the atmosphere buzzed with the kind of authentic energy that came from family recipes passed down through generations. Maya fell into the rhythm easily, her body remembering the dance of professional service even as her mind remained hyper-aware of the bodyguards positioned discreetly throughout the dining room. Around 3 in the afternoon, Dante appeared in the kitchen doorway. Maya looked up from rolling silverware to find him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. He'd changed from his morning casual clothes into a dark business suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and commanded immediate attention from everyone in the kitchen. "How is she doing?" he asked Sophia, though his eyes never left Maya's face. "She'll do," Sophia replied with the kind of grudging approval that Maya sensed was high praise from the older woman. "She works hard and doesn't complain." Also, she told Tony to keep his hands to himself when he tried to grab her waist, and she did it in perfect Italian. "I like a girl with spine." Maya felt her cheeks flush at the compliment, particularly when she saw the approval in Dante's eyes. She'd been learning Italian phrases from customers for years, and it had felt natural to use them when the situation called for it. "I need to take care of some business," Dante said to Maya. "Marco will drive you back to the penthouse when you're finished here. Don't go anywhere else, and don't leave with anyone but him." The seriousness in his voice reminded Maya that despite the normalcy of working in a restaurant kitchen, the danger surrounding them was still very real. She nodded, accepting the restriction even though part of her chafed at being managed like a child. Dante left with his usual fluid grace, but Maya noticed the tension in his shoulders and the way his jaw was set with what looked like barely controlled anger. Whatever business he was handling, it wasn't going well. Her suspicions were confirmed when he returned to the penthouse that evening looking like he'd been through a war. His suit jacket was gone, his shirt sleeves rolled up, and there was a cut on his knuckles that he was clearly trying to ignore. Dark circles under his eyes suggested the stress was taking a toll despite his controlled exterior. "What happened?" Maya asked, setting down the book she'd been reading and moving toward him instinctively. "Victoria's family made a move against one of our legitimate businesses," Dante replied, accepting the ice pack she offered for his hand without argument. "They burned down a construction site we've been developing for 2 years. Millions of dollars in damage and dozens of people out of work because they want to prove I can't protect what's mine." The exhaustion and frustration in his voice made Maya's chest tighten with sympathy. She could see how much the attack had cost him, not just financially but personally. The people affected weren't just employees to him. They were part of the extended family he felt responsible for protecting. "I'm sorry," Maya said softly, settling beside him on the sofa. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Dante looked at her with surprise, as if the offer of support was unexpected. "You being here helps more than you know. It's been a long time since I had someone to come home to who wasn't looking for something from me." The admission was quietly devastating in its honesty. Maya realized that despite all his power and wealth, Dante was profoundly lonely. Everyone in his life wanted something from him, needed his protection or his resources or his connections. She was perhaps the only person who'd given him something without expecting anything in return. Without thinking, Maya reached for his injured hand, examining the cut with gentle fingers. "This needs to be cleaned properly," she said, noting the way his breath caught slightly at her touch. In his bathroom, Maya found herself standing between Dante's knees as he sat on the edge of the massive marble tub, carefully cleaning the wound on his knuckles. The intimacy of caring for him made her hyper-aware of every breath, every slight movement, every place their bodies were almost touching. "Thank you," Dante said quietly, his voice lower than usual. "For today, for working at my mother's restaurant, for not running away when things get complicated." Maya looked up from his hand to find his green-gray eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that made her pulse flutter wildly. The air between them felt charged with possibility, heavy with all the things they weren't saying. "I'm not going anywhere," Maya replied, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "This is complicated and dangerous and probably crazy, but I'm not running." "Maya," Dante said, her name a question and a promise all at once. She was falling in love with him. The realization hit her with stunning clarity as she stood there between his legs, his injured hand cradled in hers, his eyes holding secrets and vulnerabilities he shared with no one else. She was falling in love with a man whose world included violence and moral complexities she barely understood, and she was doing it willingly. When Dante's free hand came up to cup her cheek, Maya leaned into the touch without hesitation. His thumb traced across her skin with reverent gentleness, and she saw her own feelings reflected in his eyes. Their first kiss was soft, questioning, full of the tenderness that had been building between them for days. Maya's hands fisted in his shirt as he pulled her closer, their mouths moving together with a sweetness that made her chest ache with emotion. When they broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, Dante rested his forehead against hers. "This changes everything," he said quietly. "I know," Maya whispered back, her heart racing with equal parts fear and excitement. Later that night, as they sat together on his sofa talking about their different worlds and what it might mean for them to bridge that gap, Dante received a phone call that made his expression go completely cold. The conversation was brief and conducted in Italian, but Maya caught enough to understand that whatever he'd learned was devastating. When he ended the call, his hands were shaking slightly. "What is it?" Maya asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. "Victoria wasn't just setting me up the night you saved me," Dante said, his voice hollow with betrayal. "She'd been feeding information about my family's operations to her people for 8 months. Every detail about our security, our business locations, our family members. She knew everything." The scope of the betrayal was staggering. Maya watched the man she was falling in love with process the fact that his life had been compromised for months by someone he'd trusted completely. The violation went beyond personal hurt into something that threatened everyone he cared about. Maya reached for his hand, offering what comfort she could while understanding that this revelation changed the stakes of everything they were facing. The people hunting her hadn't just lost an opportunity when Victoria died. They'd lost their most valuable source of intelligence about their enemy, which meant they'd be even more desperate to eliminate the woman who destroyed their carefully laid plans. 2 weeks after their first kiss, Maya woke in Dante's arms for the 3rd morning in a row, and the rightness of it still took her breath away. Sometime during the night, she'd migrated from her guest's suite to his bedroom, drawn by nightmares about gunfire and threatening messages that only seemed to fade when she could feel his steady heartbeat against her cheek. Dante was already awake, his fingers tracing gentle patterns along her bare shoulder as dawn light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows. In the soft morning glow, with his dark hair tousled and his green-gray eyes soft with contentment, he looked younger and more peaceful than Maya had ever seen him. "Good morning," she murmured, pressing a kiss to his collarbone and tasting the salt of his skin. "Good morning, beautiful," Dante replied, his voice rough with sleep and something deeper. His arm tightened around her, pulling her closer against his chest. "Sleep better," Maya nodded, though they both knew her nightmares were becoming more frequent as the stress of their situation intensified. The rival family's attacks on Dante's businesses had escalated over the past 2 weeks, and the constant threat was wearing on both of them despite the sanctuary they'd found in each other's arms. Last night had changed everything between them. What had started as comfort and protection had deepened into something Maya had never experienced before. When Dante had carried her to his bedroom, when he'd kissed her with reverent tenderness and whispered her name like a prayer, Maya had understood that she was crossing a line that would forever alter who she was. Their lovemaking had been achingly gentle, full of whispered confessions and careful exploration that prioritized connection over passion. Dante had worshipped her body with the same focused attention he brought to everything else, learning every response, every soft sound she made, as if memorizing her for safekeeping. "I love you," Maya said quietly, the words slipping out before she could second-guess them. The confession hung between them, vulnerable and honest, and absolutely true. Dante's breath caught, and when he looked at her, Maya saw her own feelings reflected in his eyes with stunning clarity. "I love you too," he replied, his hand cupping her face with infinite gentleness. "More than I thought I was capable of loving anyone." The admission should have terrified her. Instead, Maya felt a sense of completeness she'd never known she was missing. Whatever happened next, whatever dangers they faced, this moment was worth every risk she'd taken to reach it. Their peaceful morning was interrupted by urgent knocking on the bedroom door. Dante's entire demeanor shifted instantly, the relaxed lover replaced by the alert commander as he reached for the gun on his nightstand. "Boss," Marco's voice called through the door. "We need you downstairs. Now." Maya watched Dante transform completely, pulling on clothes with economical movements while his mind was clearly already focused on whatever crisis awaited them. The ease with which he shifted between tenderness and lethal preparation should have disturbed her, but Maya found herself fascinated by his complete competence in both roles. "Stay here," Dante instructed, pressing a quick but fervent kiss to her lips. "I'll be back as soon as I can." Maya spent the next hour pacing the penthouse, anxiety building with every minute that passed. Through the windows, she could see increased activity on the street below, black SUVs positioned strategically around the building in a way that suggested heightened security rather than normal protection. When Dante finally returned, he wasn't alone. 3 men followed him into the penthouse, all wearing the kind of expensive suits that suggested high positions in his organization. Maya recognized Marco from her rides to and from the restaurant, but the other 2 were strangers with serious expressions and calculating eyes. "Maya," Dante said, his voice carrying formal weight, "I'd like you to meet my closest advisors. You already know Marco, my second-in-command. This is Vincent, who handles our security operations, and Anthony, who manages our business interests." The introduction felt significant, like Dante was formally presenting her to his inner circle rather than simply making polite conversation. Maya understood that being introduced to these men meant accepting a deeper level of involvement in his world. "Miss Rodriguez," Vincent said with respectful formality, "Dante has told us how you saved his life. Our families are in your debt." The sincere gratitude in his voice, echoed by nods from the other men, made Maya realize that her warning to Dante had protected more than just one man. It had preserved the leader these people depended on for their livelihoods and safety. The meeting that followed was unlike anything Maya had ever witnessed. The 4 men discussed business with casual references to violence and strategy that made her understand the full scope of what Dante managed. He wasn't just wealthy or powerful. He was responsible for an intricate network of people and operations that required constant vigilance and decisive action. What impressed Maya most was how the other men deferred to Dante's judgment while still offering honest counsel. This wasn't dictatorship. It was leadership earned through competence and maintained through respect. The meeting grew tense when Vincent reported new intelligence about Victoria's family's activities. "They're getting desperate," he said grimly. "The attacks on our businesses aren't just harassment anymore. They're trying to draw us into open war." "Which brings us to a delicate matter," Anthony interjected, glancing meaningfully at Maya before addressing Dante. "Perhaps Miss Rodriguez should be somewhere safer while we handle this situation. Somewhere far from the city until the immediate threat passes." Maya felt her stomach drop as she realized what Anthony was suggesting. They wanted Dante to send her away, to hide her somewhere distant while they fought a war that had started because she'd saved his life. She watched Dante's face carefully, looking for his reaction to the suggestion. The brief hesitation she saw there, the way his jaw tightened as he considered the proposal, told her everything she needed to know. Part of him was already planning her exile. The meeting ended with arrangements being made for increased security and preparations for what Vincent diplomatically called contingencies. Maya remained silent throughout, processing the reality that Dante was seriously considering removing her from his life for her own protection. After the men left, Maya confronted him directly. "You're thinking about sending me away." Dante didn't deny it, which somehow hurt more than a lie would have. "It would be temporary," he said carefully, "just until we eliminate the immediate threat." "No," Maya replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her chest. "I won't be shuffled off like baggage while you handle the consequences of my decision to save you." "Maya, this isn't about pride or independence. Victoria's family is planning something major, and having you here makes you a target they can use against me." "Then we face it together," Maya said firmly. "I made my choice when I slipped you that note. I confirmed it when I came here with you. I'm not running now because things are getting dangerous." "You don't understand what these people are capable of," Dante argued, his frustration evident. "They'll use you to destroy everything I've built, everyone I'm responsible for protecting." "Then teach me," Maya replied, stepping closer to him. "Show me how to be part of this world instead of trying to protect me from it. I'm not some helpless victim anymore, Dante. I'm the woman who loves you, and I choose to stay." The conflict in Dante's eyes was painful to witness. Maya could see him torn between his protective instincts and his respect for her autonomy, between keeping her safe and honoring their partnership. Their argument was interrupted by the sound of explosions from the street below. The building shook slightly, and emergency alarms began blaring throughout the penthouse. Through the windows, Maya could see smoke rising from vehicles in the street and the muzzle flashes of gunfire. The final attack had begun. Dante's transformation was instantaneous. He moved with lethal purpose, grabbing weapons and communication equipment while barking orders into his phone. Maya watched him become the dangerous man his enemies feared, every movement economical and deadly. The penthouse's security systems activated automatically, steel shutters sliding down over the windows, while reinforced barriers sealed the main entrances. Maya realized that Dante's home was as much fortress as residence, designed to withstand exactly this kind of assault. Maya, Dante commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. There's a safe room behind the master bedroom. Biometric lock. Only responds to my fingerprint and yours now. Get inside and don't come out until I come for you personally. Maya started to argue, but the look in Dante's eyes stopped her words. This wasn't the man who'd made love to her so tenderly hours earlier. This was the leader who'd kept his family alive in a world where showing weakness meant death. I love you, she said instead, the words carrying all the things she couldn't say about fear and hope and the terrible possibility that this might be goodbye. I love you too, Dante replied, crushing her against his chest for one fierce moment before releasing her. Now go. Maya made it halfway to the safe room before the lights went out and the real attack began. In the darkness, lit only by emergency lighting and the strobing glow of gunfire from the street, she heard the distinctive sound of the penthouse's defenses being systematically breached. She never saw the men who grabbed her from behind, never heard them approach over the sound of the battle raging throughout the building. One moment she was moving toward safety, and the next she was being dragged toward a service elevator she hadn't known existed. As consciousness faded from the chemical-soaked cloth pressed over her nose and mouth, Maya's last coherent thought was that she'd finally gotten her wish. She was no longer a bystander in Dante's dangerous world. She'd become its most valuable target. Maya woke with her head pounding and her wrists bound behind her back, the metallic taste of whatever they'd used to drug her still coating her tongue. The room was dark except for a single harsh bulb overhead, and the concrete walls suggested she was in some kind of industrial building far from Dante's penthouse. Her captors had underestimated her, though. Growing up in rough neighborhoods had taught Maya to stay aware even when afraid, to notice details that might mean the difference between survival and becoming another statistic. She counted footsteps in the hallway outside, memorized voices, and carefully tested the knots holding her wrists until she found the weak point. The door opened, and Maya recognized the man who entered from newspaper photos she'd seen during the police investigation. Lorenzo Calvetti, Victoria's older brother and the head of the rival family that had been systematically attacking Dante's operations. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 40, with the kind of cold eyes that suggested he viewed violence as a business tool rather than a last resort. Miss Rodriguez, Lorenzo said with mocking politeness, I trust you're comfortable. You're quite the celebrity in our circles. The little waitress who destroyed months of careful planning with a single note. Maya kept her expression neutral despite the fear clawing at her chest. She'd learned from watching Dante that showing weakness to dangerous people was an invitation for them to exploit it. What do you want? She asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Justice, Lorenzo replied, settling into a chair across from her with casual arrogance. My sister died because you interfered in family business. That requires compensation. Your sister died because she was a traitor, Maya shot back, anger overriding her caution. She was planning to murder the man she claimed to love. That's not family business. That's betrayal. Lorenzo's expression darkened with fury, and Maya realized her defiance had struck deeper than she'd intended. Whatever relationship he'd had with Victoria, her betrayal of Dante had complicated his feelings in ways that made him even more dangerous. You think Romano will come for you, Lorenzo said, leaning forward with predatory focus. You think your value to him is worth risking his organization. But you're wrong, little waitress. Men like us don't sacrifice empires for women. He'll grieve you, but he won't destroy himself to save you. Maya lifted her chin with more courage than she felt. You don't know him at all if you think that. The conversation was interrupted by urgent voices from the hallway, speaking rapid Italian that Maya caught enough of to understand. Dante had found them, and he wasn't coming alone. Lorenzo's confident demeanor cracked as gunfire erupted somewhere in the building, systematic and precise in a way that suggested professional assault rather than random violence. He grabbed his phone, barking orders that became increasingly frantic as whoever answered reported the progression of Dante's attack. Maya had been working on her restraints throughout the conversation, using techniques she'd learned from a self-defense class years earlier. When Lorenzo's attention was focused on coordinating his men's defense, she managed to slip one wrist free and began working on the rope around her ankles. The door burst open as Maya freed her legs, and chaos erupted around her. Lorenzo drew his weapon, but Maya was already moving, throwing herself sideways as bullets shattered the concrete where she'd been sitting. Her months of working in Dante's dangerous world had taught her that survival often meant acting on instinct rather than thinking through every option. She rolled behind an overturned table as the gunfight intensified, her heart racing with equal parts terror and desperate hope. Dante had come for her, just as she'd known he would. All she had to do was survive long enough for him to reach her. When Dante appeared in the doorway, weapon raised and his green-gray eyes scanning for threats with lethal focus, Maya felt her chest tighten with overwhelming relief. He looked like an avenging angel in his dark tactical gear, deadly and beautiful and completely in control of the violence surrounding them. "Maya," Dante called, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Here," she called back, rising from behind the table with her hands visible so he'd know she wasn't a threat. Their eyes met across the smoke-filled room, and Maya saw the exact moment Dante registered that she was alive and mostly unharmed. The relief that flooded his features was quickly replaced by renewed fury as he turned his attention to Lorenzo, who was backing toward what looked like another exit. The confrontation between the two men was brief and decisive. Dante moved with the kind of lethal precision that ended fights before they truly began, and Lorenzo's attempt to use Maya as leverage failed when she proved capable of protecting herself rather than requiring rescue. When the gunfire finally stopped and the immediate threats had been neutralized, Dante crossed the room in 3 quick strides and pulled Maya into his arms with desperate intensity. She could feel him trembling slightly as he held her, his face buried in her hair, while he whispered her name like a prayer of thanksgiving. "I thought I'd lost you," Dante said, his voice rough with emotion. "When I found you gone, when I realized they'd taken you." "I knew you'd come," Maya replied, pulling back to cup his face in her hands. "I never doubted that for a second." The cleanup took hours, but Maya barely noticed the activity around them as Dante's people secured the scene and dealt with the aftermath. She remained close to his side, unwilling to be separated from him even for the practical necessities of ending a war that had started because she'd chosen to save a stranger's life. Later, back at the penthouse, Maya found herself sitting on the edge of Dante's bed while he carefully cleaned minor cuts and bruises she'd sustained during her captivity. His hands were gentle but thorough, his attention focused completely on caring for her injuries despite the fact that he'd just orchestrated a complex military operation. "It's over," Dante said quietly, his fingers tracing the rope burns on her wrists with reverent care. "Lorenzo's organization is finished. The remaining members are either dead or have fled the city. No one else will come for you because of what you did that night at Bellecourt." Maya nodded, understanding that the external threat that had brought them together was finally eliminated. But instead of relief, she felt a strange uncertainty about what came next. Their relationship had been forged in crisis and sustained by danger. Without those pressures, would what they'd built together survive in normal circumstances? Dante seemed to sense her thoughts because he moved to kneel in front of her, taking her hands in his with careful gentleness. "Maya Rodriguez," he said, his voice carrying formal weight that made her breath catch. "These past weeks have shown me what my life was missing before you came into it. You've made me want things I never thought I could have." Maya's heart began racing as she realized what was happening. Dante reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box that he opened with hands that trembled almost imperceptibly. The ring inside was stunning, a classic solitaire that managed to be both elegant and understated. But what took Maya's breath away wasn't the jewelry itself, but the vulnerable hope in Dante's eyes as he waited for her response. "I love you," he said simply. "Not because you saved my life, not because you've proven yourself in my world, but because you make me want to be worthy of the trust you've placed in me. Will you marry me?" Maya felt tears spill down her cheeks as she looked at this dangerous, gentle man who'd protected her and challenged her and shown her depths of feeling she'd never known she was capable of. Yes, she whispered, then stronger. Yes, absolutely yes. The ring slid onto her finger perfectly, and Maya realized that Dante had somehow known her size without ever asking. It was such a small thing, but it represented the careful attention to detail that characterized everything he did for the people he loved. Their wedding 3 months later was a study in elegant intimacy. The ceremony took place in the gardens of Sophia Romano's estate in Long Island, with string lights creating a fairy tale atmosphere as the sun set over manicured lawns and carefully tended rose bushes. Maya wore Sophia's wedding dress, altered to fit her perfectly and updated with subtle modern touches that honored both tradition and her own style. Walking down the aisle toward Dante, who looked devastatingly handsome in his charcoal gray tuxedo, Maya felt like the luckiest woman alive. The guest list was relatively small, but included people who'd become genuinely important to both of them. Maya's mother, whose medical treatments had been quietly taken care of without fanfare, sat in the front row crying happy tears. Sophia Romano beamed with maternal pride, having gained the daughter-in-law she'd been hoping her son would find. When Dante lifted Maya's veil and looked at her with wonder and devotion, she felt the last of her fears about their different worlds fade away. They'd created something together that transcended background and circumstances, something built on mutual respect and genuine love. "I promise to protect you, honor you, and love you for the rest of my life," Dante said during their personal vows, his voice carrying across the garden with quiet conviction. "I promise to stand beside you, challenge you, and choose you every day, no matter what life brings us," Maya replied, her voice steady despite the tears of joy streaming down her face. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, their kiss was soft and reverent, full of promises and hope for their future together. Has your own love story ever felt like it was written in the stars, where every challenge led you exactly where you were meant to be? Maya's journey from that terrifying night at Bellecourt to this perfect moment reminded her that sometimes the most frightening decisions lead to the most beautiful destinations. 18 months later, Maya Romano stood in the kitchen of their new home, a sprawling estate in Westchester that provided both security and space for the family they were building. Her hand rested protectively over her rounded belly, feeling the gentle movements of the daughter who would arrive in just 3 months. The morning sun streamed through windows that overlooked gardens Sophia had helped her design, and Maya smiled as she heard Dante's voice from his office nearby, conducting business calls with the patient authority that had made their legitimate enterprises thrive beyond everyone's expectations. The restaurant businesses had expanded into a small empire of upscale Italian dining, while the construction company had become one of the most respected development firms in the tri-state area. Dante had worked systematically to transition their operations away from anything that might endanger their growing family, though Maya knew he maintained the connections necessary to protect the people who depended on him. Maya had found her own place in their world, managing the business side of Sophia's expanding catering operation while pursuing a degree in hospitality management. The woman who'd once worried about paying her mother's medical bills now oversaw budgets in the millions, but she'd never lost sight of the values that had led her to save a stranger's life in a restaurant that felt like a lifetime ago. Dante appeared in the kitchen doorway, his hair slightly mussed from running his fingers through it during difficult negotiations. Even after nearly 2 years of marriage, Maya felt her pulse quicken when those green-gray eyes focused on her with complete devotion. "Good morning, Mrs. Romano," he said, crossing to wrap his arms around her from behind, his hands settling over hers on her belly. "How are my girls feeling today?" "Perfect," Maya replied, leaning back against his chest with contentment that still amazed her. "Absolutely perfect." Their daughter kicked strongly, as if agreeing with her mother's assessment, and Dante laughed with the pure joy of a man who'd found everything he'd never known he was looking for in the woman who'd risked herself to keep him alive. Outside their kitchen windows, the world continued its complicated dance of light and shadow, but inside their home, surrounded by the family they'd chosen and the love they'd built together, Maya and Dante Romano had found their own perfect piece of forever.